welcome. I know it's the last talk of the day, of the first full day. Who's tired? Who's too tired to even raise their hand? Yeah. Thank you all for coming. This is next level device management with Fleet. Our agenda for today, I'm going to talk about what's new with Fleet, but we're going to start with a little overview of Fleet, and then Brock's going to join us to talk about discovering XZ with Fleet. Then I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about our roadmap of where we're heading for the end of the year with that. And then if time allows, I've set up a walkthrough workshop that you'll be able to partake in and do a little sleuthing with Fleet. So we'll get started with this. You're probably wondering who I am. I do that often. The state gives me a little card with my name and picture on it to help me remind me. But I am Jack-Daniyel, or JD Strong. I'm a client platform engineer and community advocate for Fleet. I've been Mac adminning for 25 plus years. I'm tired. I'm a former Apple reseller, service provider, and sourdough bread baker. And my poor sourdough has been abused because I've been on the road for like the last 3 weeks now. So the yeasties, also known as the yeasty boys, are a little sad and tired. But anyway, we're here to talk about what's new with Fleet. And what we're going to cover are maintenance windows, using GitOps, operating system, CVEs, and remote script execution. But first, I want to let you know that we do have some channels on the Slacks between the Mac OS or Mac admins Slack. We have a Fleet channel, and then also over on the OS Query Slack, we also have a Fleet channel as well. So please join the community, join the conversation. If you're not sure how to do a query, there are lots of helpful people, including our own team out there, that are more than willing to step in and help you out with that. So I want to start first by surveying the room. Who knows what OS Query is without reading the slide that I'm going to read to you later? All right, I expect you to. Who knows what Fleet is? Who stopped by the booth yet? Well, only 3 of you. Yeah, I see. Come by the booth. We got other swag. I have Sharpies. So OS Query, for those of you who don't know, is a project that started about a decade ago at Facebook. One of our co-founders was a co-creator of that original project. And it essentially turns all of your endpoints, Mac, Windows, Linux, Chromebooks, into a giant database that you can use SQL to ask questions of. With Fleet, we've integrated a lot of the community tables that are out there. So there's over 300, actually I think we're up to 325 tables of data that's available. So with other platforms, you might have to write a script to go get that data element. Think of this as OS Query is prefetching all of that and having it at your fingertips. It also allows you, especially with Fleet, to ask questions and get answers immediately. So you can say, tell me all the devices out there that might be affected by a potential bug or vulnerability. And you can actually answer that question starting in 10 to 15 seconds. You'll get responses back from those endpoints. And Brock's going to talk more about that. But it also allows you to ask more complex questions, things that you otherwise would have to export a data set from your MDM and also a data set from your EDR and combine those things together. Here you can just join a few tables together and pick the columns of data that you need, and now you have a nicely formatted report that you didn't have to figure out how to do a join table in Excel to put together. So that leads us to, what is Fleet? We're an open source project. OS Query is also an open source project, so we're built on top of that. We're basically a centralized management tool for OS Query. And so that means that we're managing updates of OS Query to all the endpoints. We're also giving you the ability to do live queries. So that's asking those real-time questions, but also scheduling queries. So that might be something where you want to schedule a routine run to collect data and maybe push that to a data lake or a SIM if you have security compliance needs and things like that. We have a full REST API that backs all of this, along with the ability to call webhooks, and we'll get into a little bit of that. Basically, we allow you to manage OS query across hundreds of thousands of endpoints, and we actually are scaled up to that, and we do test at that level. So whether you have 10 devices in your home lab, and we are, again, free and open source, so please spin this up, run it in your home lab, and enroll your family devices and see what's going on with them as a way to get started. But we can scale from 10 to hundreds of thousands without a problem. And finally, on top of that, we have an MDM that is completely optional. We run alongside other MDMs. We've run alongside Jamf and Mosel and other platforms for a while. We've introduced our own MDM into that because there's a lot more that we can do with that capability. So since a lot of you aren't familiar with OS Query, let's get into a little bit of what SQL is. Who's familiar with SQL? A couple of you? Okay. The nice thing about Fleet and the way we've set this up is, especially if you're using the UI, we have a query builder in there. You have access to all of the tables that has the schema for all of the tables, and at the bottom of those help documents are example queries. And 90% of the time, I want to say that what you're trying to do is probably can start in the example query, and you can build out from there. The basic structure of SQL is you're selecting which columns of data that you want from a data source or a table. And then optionally, you can add conditions to it. So you can say where it's equal to the 501 user or this serial number. You can order the rows of data that are coming back at you by particular columns. And then you can also join tables together and matching those on specific keys. So an example, a very simplified example, is select username from the users table and order by username. So that's going to give you all the users that are on a particular device and sort them alphabetically for you. So speaking of tables, there's over 300, like I said, and we're going to go through each one of these individually. No, I'm kidding. But I did never shorten this
I am
slide.
actually going through each one of them.
Oh, you are? Okay, perfect. So this build I thought was a funny joke, and
it is a funny joke until you actually have to do it.
Until I actually have to do it, because now I have to sit here and wait. I could skip this, but oh wait, we're almost done.
There's more.
But are we?
No.
Are we done? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Actually, we're done. So columns generally have a column name, a type, and a description. This is an example of what we provide in the documentation on a particular table. So this is the running apps table. It's going to tell you what apps are running and give you the process ID and the bundle ID of those processes. You can join this with other tables to find out what that bundle identifier actually is associated with, where it launched out of, other things like that. Filters, so we can get really fancy here with splits and joins and concatenations, but we're going to keep this simple for today. So if you only wanted to select certain columns, you might select column 1, column 2 from the table. You can put a condition on there of like where the column is equal to a particular string. You can also use wildcards, so this is great for partial matching, or if you want all of the users, you might say /users/ %/ and then whatever other path you might be looking for, maybe the library folder or something like that, and that'll return all of the files that are in that particular structure. A couple of examples here. The processes table will give you a snapshot of what's happening. So this could be used to find a specific process that maybe you expect to be running and maybe it's not. And then you could use this to kick off a webhook that calls back using our remote script execution capability to kick that process back off, make sure it stays running. for that. The users table, this helps you answer questions that are maybe a per user answer. You use the UID generally to connect this to other things like the processes table or things like that. Anybody know who UID 501 is? There you go. Wow, you guys are awake. Congratulations. Other things that we have a Chrome extensions table, so this is pretty handy. And here's a good example of a cross-join, of cross-joining the Chrome extensions table and the users table to figure out what Chrome extensions are installed on a particular machine and who's using them. So yeah, there's a lot of great things. And these are I'm just basically skirting the tables that are out there. Another one's the events tables. So we have a couple of them here. So for Mac OS and Linux, there's the file events table. On Windows, there's NTFS journal events and PowerShell events. And then also process events and socket events for Mac OS and Linux for that. But for events, this allows you to do detection and investigation of several processes that might be happening. If you have a need for file integrity monitoring or file access monitoring, you can do that. If you have a policy of, yes, you can plug USB devices in, but you want to know what gets plugged in, that might be a scheduled query that you're running and looking at, and then you're pumping all of that data into a data lake or a SIM so that you have that data over time to see what a user actually plugged in to that USB device port for that or what have you, if you're not disabling that through your MDM. And that leads us into policies. So policies are a feature that we have that essentially is a pass-fail query. And sometimes these get a little backwards, and Brock's going to kind of cover this because it feels a little unnatural because you're looking for generally the opposite of what you actually want the state to be. And you want that to, then that basically fails out the policy, and that's what you can use to trigger off an automation there. So an example of this might be disk encryption. And the nice thing about Fleet is, especially in the UI, we give you a lot of these examples right out of the gate, so you're not having to recreate the wheel. For example, here, we have full disk encryption for all three platforms. Chromebooks, not so much. But that's a limitation of Chromebooks, not of Fleet's capability to look into Chromebooks. So, and what's nice is when you're looking at your policies here, you can see which ones are failing and at a quick glance, and then click on that and get the entire list. And from here, you can export that. You can take action. You already have that list. But you can also put automation behind this as well. Other examples of policies might be like the firewall being enabled. You might use your MDM to enable the firewall, but it can get shut off. That MDM command maybe doesn't always make it all the way down to the endpoint. If you want to validate that and verify that, this is how you might go about doing that. And the first way for Mac OS is we're going to look at ALF, the ALF table, and see if the global state is greater than or equal to 1. And if that's true, we're going to return true. So basically, if for some reason ALF is set to 0, then this is going to return a zero or false, and that's going to fail the policy. On Windows, it's a little different. This is probably my favorite thing about the Windows Security Center. Firewall is good. You might also have maybe unwanted software on a device. So here's an example of how you might create a policy. And this is using kind of a weird, twisty way around of doing it, of selecting one where not exists. So as long as Discord doesn't exist on the device, we're going to report that everything's okay. So this is basically a negative policy for that. So from these policies, we can create automations. And Fleet basically works with anything that can receive or can generate a webhook that we can call. So that might be any orchestrator like Tines, Okta Workflows, Make.com. My favorite is an open source project called N8N. Encourage you to look back at last year's session that I gave about N8N. Others, use other platforms. I know you're a heavy user of Okta Workflows. He does some cool stuff. So we'll get into that. All right, so that's a quick overview of Fleet. I could get a lot more in depth on this, but we're not going to do that because you're already falling asleep on me. So let's talk about what's new with Fleet. And one of the biggest things that we've added recently is a thing called maintenance windows. Like any good colleague, if you want time with them, you should put time on their calendar. And that's what Fleet's going to do. So we actually integrate with like your Google Calendar. And when you have a policy that kicks off this type of a maintenance window, we will look into the calendar, find time on their calendar, and book 30 minutes. And when that happens, the user will see that on their calendar. They delete it. It'll pop back up the next day. If they move it around, we'll respect that. So if they go, maybe 5 o'clock, in the evening is a better time. So I'm going to move it to 5 o'clock in the evening. As long as they leave the laptop open, at 5 o'clock, we're going to kick off that automation. And that can be, it's basically calling a webhook. So whatever you want to do at that point, it could be for, encouraging a software update. It could be running a script. It could be updating software. So configuring this is pretty easy. In policies, under manage automations, we have calendar events. It's pretty easy to just enable that and then paste in your webhook that you want to call and select whatever relevant policies that you want to trigger that webhook, and then hit save. Easy peasy. Everything's easy, right? The next thing I want to talk about is GitOps. So this is infrastructure as code. It's not for everybody. Who's doing GitOps now? Perfect. Harrison's our one that's doing all of it. Thank you, Harrison. So what this does is bring CI/CD, or continuous integration, continuous development, into managing Fleet. This gives you version control. So with a lot of other platforms, you have a ClickOps interface, and you might be able to export that mobile config file. You might be able to save that policy, but probably not. Your best bet is a full backup of the database. With this setup, what we're actually doing is creating a set of YAML files, and we give you an example of this to get you started at the GitHub repo there, github.com/fleetdm/fleet-gitops. And that is where you're going to store things like scripts, policies, queries. I'm kind of getting ahead of my slides here because that's what I do, is I talk ahead of my slides. But what this does is it also brings in auditability to your changes, a little bit of checks and balances. Hey, I want to push this new policy. A colleague can verify that what you're going to push out there might not brick everything, and can put that out there. But also, because it's managed in a Git repo, you can easily revert, as long as you haven't completely unenrolled all of your devices, which could be a bad day. Possibly, maybe. You can revert back and kind of have an undo button, which with a lot of other platforms you may not be able to do. So getting started with GitOps is pretty easy. Just clone that repo, add a couple of tokens to your secrets file. Do not put your secret keys in your repo, please. Please. Make changes to those policies, queries, controls in the YAML files. Add scripts if you'd like. Push those changes with your own GitHub repository. And then we even provide the workflow to automatically apply all of those configurations. The structure of that file is there's a default YAML file. So this is the default configuration for your entire Fleet instance. And then there's a library folder, a lib folder. This contains your policies, queries, configuration profiles, scripts, and agent options. Teams folder, this only applies if you do have a premium license. And this allows you to do per team configuration for that. The open source Community Edition doesn't support Teams for that. And then we have an example workflow for GitHub. And this will kick off the GitHub Actions workflow to apply this configuration to your Fleet instance. And then finally, we have the GitOps script that applies the configuration using the Fleet CTL GitOps command. So that's GitOps. The next thing that we've added is operating system CVEs. So this is going to give you publicly disclosed security flaws that are found in operating systems. We already do this for software out there, but we've added the ability to also get this for your operating systems. And we cross-reference the OS query data against the CVE databases to identify potentially vulnerable vulnerabilities for that. We recently added vulncheck NVD++. So if you don't know, if you're not familiar with CVEs, vulnerabilities get a CVE number assigned, but the National Vulnerability Database is a little behind in updating those. So what vulncheck has done is for any existing CVE out there that may not actually have the background information in there, they're actually providing that. So we're pulling that information in so that when you click through, you actually get to see what the CVE is about, and you're not having to wait for the National Vulnerability Database to catch up. We also provide an EPSS score, which is the probability of exploit, so you can see how probable it might be that a particular CVE might be exploited. Some of them, we're going to wait on a certain company named after a fruit to release an OS update for them. Others might be named after a pane of glass. Anyway, the last thing I want to talk about here is remote script execution. This is a feature that's available in our Community Edition along with the premium version of Fleet. This is pretty cool and very powerful. Allows you to run Bash or ZSH scripts on macOS or Linux and PowerShell scripts on Windows. Probably the coolest thing about this is that they execute like our live queries within 10 to 15 seconds. And if that actual script is returning data or reporting back anything, you're going to see that live in that execution. If you do call this through our API, it's going to return all of that, any of the return data up to 1,000 lines to you as well through our API. So this is handy for one-off calls from policy events or anything that you might want to take action with on a device, and you can manage all of this as well with GitOps. So to wrap up, what's new here is maintenance windows, GitOps, OS CVEs, and remote script execution. So with that, I'm going to hand you off to Brock, who's going to talk about XE. Maybe.
Yes.
After he replies to the live thread that he's on.
Hi, everybody. I don't know if I have I do have a slide in here. I did use the most hackneyed biographical information joke in the history of biographical information jokes that I like candlelit dinners and long romantic walks on the beach. I don't feel good about it, but I left it in. I am the Customer Solutions Architect at Fleet. If any of you took a Jamf course or from anywhere between 2013 and 2018, I might have taught it, or I might have created the material for that course. That's what I did at Jamf. I worked in the education services team. I worked for about 3 years at Apple on the client tech team, which is responsible for all the devices in all the stores that aren't Apple retail stores. A little bit of bragging there. There's about 550 Apple retail stores. There's about 250,000 points of sale that aren't Apple retail stores. So there's a lot more of those devices out in the world than the ones in the Apple retail stores. And I've also worked as an admin at Stars and Vanguard. And I enjoy candlelit dinners and long romantic walks on the beach. I don't know why I put that in there. What I want to talk about is Fleet is, I would say, hyper aware of its what it doesn't do. We're kind of very aware of transparency. It's an open source product. We publish all of our code in public, and everything that the company does, kind of from as a moral philosophy, is done in public. And so this little bit of the talk is kind of in that spirit. I want to talk about remediating the XZ vulnerability, and how many of you were familiar with the XZ vulnerability that occurred earlier this year? Okay. It was kind of a big deal because it's a very popular library that's distributed in other packages. If your users are using Homebrew, they might have had it on their computer and not even known. So what I'm gonna, and when this happened, one thing that I was kind of interested in figuring out as a case study is how effective is the Fleet product in remediating a problem like this alone, right? Without using other methods or tools. And that's really what we're gonna focus on here for a minute. So the first thing to talk about is touching on some of the topics that JD covered. Fleet is very, very good at discovery, getting telemetry from your devices. This is an example of a query that you might use to find if you had XZ installed on a Linux system. And as you can see, this is referencing an RPM package table, a Debian package table, and just the programs table looking for something with XZ as a wildcard string. So this is the kind of query that you can write that is extremely powerful. I don't have an example of this in a slide, but out of the box in the Fleet UI, we were also able to detect and search for the XZ vulnerability because we have a query built into Fleet that is called the host vitals query. And that is would be the rough equivalent of the inventory record in a tool like Jamf, right? Where you have the inventory running, there's a computer record, or there's an iOS device record. The host vitals query returns that inventory data that appears for each host in Fleet. Out of the box, that query uses the Homebrew packages table. And we were able to detect whether or not computers had XZ installed via Homebrew just by doing a search in the Fleet UI, which is really cool, without creating any custom queries. The problem with that, and again, this is in the interest of radical transparency, the problem with that is that we weren't able out of the box to detect any other methods of XZ installation. So you would have had to create a custom query to find something like that. The next step, the next phase after discovering something like this would be, what are the remediation steps to fix it? Very glad you're doing this. Thank you so much. Oh, no problem. All right, testing.
He gave us a thumbs up that you have audio.
Cool. So, This is touching on something else that JD mentioned as well. This is kind of some of that negative reverse query logic that you need in order to get a result where you're trying to find something on a host that doesn't exist, right? In this particular case, the good state, in other words, the state that doesn't need to be remediated, would be a host that doesn't have XZ with this version, right? The bad state is if you had XZ greater than that version. And it turns out that that's kind of difficult to describe with the SQL query language. And this is where the funny business occurs. So in a SQL query, when you are using select one, what you're really saying effectively is select every row from the table. I don't care about anything else. Select one just says give me every row. And then this is what's called a subselect. And in that subselect, we're then saying select every row where the value that we're looking for doesn't exist. It's a little twisty. And if it's hurting your brain right now, don't feel bad. It's a little twisty. And this brings us to where we can talk about things that maybe Fleet can do better at in the future. Did I miss a step? I think I'm missing a slide. One thing that we didn't talk about in here is actually running a command to update Homebrew. For this case study, what I actually did was created this policy. And this policy on failure sends a webhook. And we use Tines as an orchestrator, as JD mentioned earlier. And in my Tines workflow, that receives the webhook that comes from the policy failure, and then calls back to Fleet to execute a script to upgrade or update Homebrew. That was the remediation step. So where are the opportunities? One is that we could enhance Fleet's UI search capabilities. I think everybody in this room, and probably everybody at this conference, there have been a number of presentations talking about GitOps workflows and that type of automation, and using APIs, of course. But it's still important to have a good UI. It's still important for testing, like to make the kinds of jobs you folks do, to be able to say, okay, I did this thing in the UI, and there's an equivalent for this thing in the API that now will let me automate that thing that I just tested with a click. So UIs are important, and we totally understand that. Another thing to talk about is simplifying some of the Fleet policy features. And this isn't meant as a cutesy pie way of talking about this. This is a real term that gets thrown around, I guess. Syntactic sugar, right? Meaning there would be things in Fleet that we could do to make that twisty SQL query logic easier for human brains to understand. And it would be nice if we could do that for our users, rather than having to reach out into the Slack channel to talk to a SQL expert. Maybe there would be ways within the Fleet product that we could make writing queries like that easier by maybe selecting from pre-built queries or pre-generating some of the logic that you might need based on the result you're trying to get. Another capability that would make a remediation like this a lot smoother is if we didn't have to use a third-party orchestration tool to receive the webhook from Fleet and send a call back to Fleet to execute the script. What would be awesome is if on a policy failure within the Fleet product, we would be able to call the script for remediation. So what's pretty exciting is that all of these things are on our roadmap. And part of what we do in terms of road mapping is try to be very, very focused on using our own product internally to make these kinds of workflows better, easier to use for our customers. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to JD. That's a little bit of a talk about how you might actually use Fleet to remediate a real problem state.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you.
All right. Hopefully my audio is okay. Next up, we're going to talk about Fleet's roadmap. For that, generally somebody else covers this, but here's another Who Am I slide. I'm a grizzled ancient. You're welcome.
Almost as bad as the candle.
I know, almost. So it's tough doing this 25 plus years. I'm not angry, I'm just bitter. So we're adding iOS and iPad OS support to Fleet. So we do have automatic device enrollment and most any MDM command, not most any, all MDM commands that you can send to it. Those are functionality is actually shipped and ready to go now from when this deck was created. BYOD enrollment is coming as well as VPP support for App Store apps and operating system updates for iOS and iPad OS. On the app management side, right now we have deploy security agents and custom packages. We're going to be adding patch management as well to that. This actually has been added, but I forgot the check mark on here. But you can actually scope apps dynamically using SQL, using OS Query. And this is actually a pretty cool feature. So you can use OS Query to say, is this device on have the proper VPN profile on this device before I roll out this piece of software, as an example. So you can do some conditionals before you actually ever deploy that state. So this is kind of like declarative, right? What we're hearing about what declarative device management might be like, but you can actually do that today with Fleet. Also, we're adding the ability to install apps and show the progress during enrollment. So kind of a dep notify type progress as you're enrolling or onboarding a device. Some other things that are coming is the ability to enforce disk encryption during automatic device enrollment, auto remediation, as Brock had alluded to, the ability to basically run a script on policy failure, the ability to pass parameters to scripts. So a lot of folks want that same functionality that JAMP provides as an example to pass, they do it based on positional variables. But from what I've scoped out for it, we'll be able to support not just positional variables, but actually named variables as well, since a lot of scripts have moved to named variables as well, and positional is painful, in my not so humble opinion. The ability to install certificates from a trusted certificate authority. ServiceNow integration. Anybody using ServiceNow currently? Okay. How about ConnectWise? Anyone? No? All right. Filter device by custom columns. So we'll be able, this is in the UI, and we're going to have some time to play with that a little bit. So you'll see this, but you'll be able to actually add some additional columns to the UI that you can actually use for filtering. And automated migration. So this is on the MDM side. We're actually almost finished testing this feature, and that we've basically fully automated the enrollment or migration process, basically unenrollment, re-enrollment to migrate MDM.
Effectively, there is no re-enrollment. It's just a migration of the enrollments from one MDM to.
Yeah. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. And if you ask me a question, you get a pair of socks. No, but they do have spots. Oh. You guys need to sit closer. You asked a question.
My wife liked the ones from, what's his name, at Apple Law.
Oh, Fleet Smith? Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, we don't have puppy dogs. We have swans. Those will be on the next pair of socks. Other questions?
Do you have plans to support Python scripts with your remote scripts?
So the question was, do we have plans to support? He's wanting me to throw the box at you. I'm not going to throw the box at you, but I will
Here,
throw it to the next
I'll
person.
man the box.
Yeah, person in the box.
This is just
Support
so
for
your question gets
Python.
recorded.
So right now, probably not, just because it's not native on any platform other than Linux. macOS is deprecated. You can deploy your own at that point. So if you're going to do that, you would just write a wrapper bash script to call your.
I would
all
say
that.
TBD. I mean, the thing about Python that is important to point out is that there no longer is a native Python runtime. A lot of people do deploy their own. They deploy the Mac admin's Python or other runtimes. If it's important to you, we are extremely responsive to
Feature requests.
Feature requests. That's kind of a big part of my job responsibility. So if that's something that customers are interested in, I don't really see. I wouldn't say it's at the top of the priority list, but it's certainly something that we could do.
Yeah. I'm going to toss this to you to toss.
Perfect.
Or to deliver. Other questions?
Can I have a pair of socks?
That question was not recorded, by the way.
The question was, can I have a pair of socks?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Of
Yeah.
course.
Okay.
One sock per question.
What? You want to throw the box at him, or Brock, throw the box at him?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Slacking at his job.
When you mentioned BYO enrollment, is that account-driven flows for account-driven user enrollment, account-driven device enrollment?
Okay, say that again, but slower.
Sorry, I'm from New York. The
When I can't see your lips because you're.
roadmap option where you said BYO
Right.
is coming,
Yeah.
are those related to account-driven user enrollment or account-driven device enrollment flows?
Yeah, so as far as. I'm blanking.
The short answer is yes.
The short answer is yes. So like if you're doing something with like Okta for a login, or you're using another single sign-on type user, what is that called? Why am I blanking on this? That user enrollment, where you log into your SSO and that creates the account and everything. Yeah, we will support that on iOS as well.
Awesome. The follow-up to that is, what about Apple Vision Pro support?
Please put that feature request in, because I would like to purchase one to dog food. Absolutely.
What I'll say about that really quickly is that we have one extremely large customer that is kind of POC, doing a wide POC of that device in their environment. We don't have a lot of other customers that have expressed a ton of interest, but I see it growing. And again, we're extremely open. The MDM capability for Vision Pro is announced, it exists, so we're going to do it. It's just a matter of prioritizing.
Yeah, the one thing I can say about anything along the Apple MDM support is that essentially once we've written support for macOS, adding iOS and iPadOS wasn't that difficult. Adding Vision OS, probably not going to be that difficult. I'm not an engineer by trade. I'm a hack, so don't listen to me. Other questions? There's socks on the line, people. You saw how easy they were to get.
Yes.
You can,
So
just repeat, you can just repeat it if you want.
Sure.
Oh, sure.
What kind of MDM capabilities are there for Windows?
What kind? Okay.
So the question was, what are the MDM capabilities for Windows? So we do have an MDM for Windows. It does require the Intune license to do that.
Technically, it's the Entra license,
Yeah.
which is
So so technically it's the Entra license for that. We have full remote script execution as well through PowerShell.
and device profiles.
And device profiles. So there is a lot of capability. There is a lot more to do on that. So absolutely, please dog food it, try it out, add feature requests.
I would say that the only thing that is maybe that requires additional licensing out of the box is Windows Autopilot. That isn't something that every customer is interested in, but anything other than that, we can do. And we are compatible with Autopilot, but there's some licensing subtleties that maybe would be not great to get into at a Mac Admins conference.
Other questions?
So you have these.
So if you do want, I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm just trying to get his attention, but that's all right.
For the self-service, whenever you add a package, can you uninstall it through the Fleet console or just through the API?
So packages, the question is can you install packages and then uninstall it through our UI versus API? Currently, it is a deployment only because it's still in development. But removal is part of that process, is planned as part of that process, even though I didn't highlight it in there. But yeah, the ability to revoke a piece of software off the device will be capable. Worst case scenario, you might have a script wrapped around pulling that, but or use something like App Cleaner or something like that. I wish App Cleaner actually had like command line that you could just say, App Cleaner, do this, and it just did that, but it doesn't yet.
So API would be the way.
Yeah, for right now.
You may need the switcher.
Yeah, right.